Okay, right, it is 10 past, and my watch says to me that this is time to start. We have loads of people, 52 participants. So my name is Paul Stokes. I'm chairing this session. This is one of the Picking Up the Threads of 2019 sessions. I'm from JISC, as you can see from the little logo there on the corner of my screen. I'm involved in preservation at JISC. I'm the product owner for the Open Research Hub that was, which is now called JISC Preservation, which might be called JISC Preservation. I'm chairing this. I will be relatively lax, but not too lax on the time, but I'll warn you when the time comes that you're getting close to the end or not, as the case may be. I have a co-chair, Beth, who is going to be hopefully looking at all the things that come up on the chat, because I want you to put your questions in the chat, please. If you can prefix it with a Q so we can see very clearly as a question, that makes it a little bit easier to pick them out. And also I should mention that we are an open and inclusive community, which essentially means be nice. So with no further ado, we'll go over to Tricia Patterson and Jessica Smith, who'll be, and Sally Bosch, I hope I pronounced it right, who will be telling us all about challenging response, uniting email, blah, blah. Okay, go for it.
All right, let me just share my screen real quick. How's that?
Ruby.
Great. And Sally, you want to start off with introductions?
Sure. Hi, I'm Sally DeBush. I am a digital archivist at Stanford University, and I'm also the project manager for the EPAD project.
And I'm Tricia Patterson. I'm a digital preservation analyst at Harvard Library, and I lead our email archiving programmatic activities at Harvard.
And I'm Jessica Smith. I'm the creative arts archivist at the John Rollins Library, University of Manchester.
And we are here today to discuss what began as 3 projects coming out of our respective institutions, and in response to the resource restrictions we're all facing because of the coronavirus epidemic. Our teams identified commonalities across our disparate objectives and merged parts of these projects into a single plan that utilizes our collective resources more efficiently, and which, by expanding our vision beyond any one of our single use cases, we hope will be more useful to the broader email archiving community.
So for this short presentation today, we'll give 3 brief overviews of our separate projects that united our interests in the first place and describe what we hope to achieve with our powers combined. Next, please. A team at Stanford has been continuously developing EPAD, which is free and open source email appraisal, processing, and delivery software since 2013. In 2019, we were awarded a grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to continue this work for 1 year, starting in January 2020. We identified 3 major development projects for this period, including creating a new attachment review feature for the software, which is pictured on the slide, developing a shared multi-institutional email discovery platform, and improving the software's performance for massive email collections. We've also identified collaboration with other institutions working on similar projects related to email processing and preservation as another main focus. And partnered with Harvard University and the University of Manchester to ensure that our individual projects were well aligned.
EASE is Harvard Library's homegrown email archiving system, originally developed in 2011, and it facilitates the processing and preservation of email records. Over the past decade, obviously, many tools have populated the landscape, and because EASE has never been open source, it's been difficult to have it interact with other tools. If, for example, we wanted to acquire email with one, process and preserve with EASE, and access with another. So our library prioritized the redeployment of EASE as an open source tool for better interoperability and sustainability. And Stephen Abrams, who is the head of digital preservation here at Harvard Library, actually presented this plan at IPRES 2019 last year. Simultaneously, we entered into a collaboration with Stanford, which Sally just introduced, to better align EPAD and EASE so that we can minimize needless replication of function and support more seamless interoperation between the two. And we were all set to begin the development of converting EASE into open source at the start of this year, but the pandemic hit and we had a hiring freeze, and our library's strategic priorities changed drastically, leaving a smaller piece of the existing development resources for us to take advantage of.
The University of Manchester Special Collections has been preserving the email archive of indie poetry publisher Carcanet Press since 2012. The collection receives regular accruals, presently stands at about 300,000 items, and is stored in our digital records repository, Preservica. When we examined EPAD, it was clear that it was going to meet almost all of our requirements for email appraisal and for management. And with the support of the library's digital applications team, we adapted EPAD's delivery module to create a pilot site which gives online access to a small test set of email. We also got in touch with Glenn and Sally at Stanford to talk about what we were up to. In 2018, we were awarded funding from Arts Council England to continue our work on email archives. The project is entitled Preserving Access to Large Literary Archives in the Digital Medium, or Palladium for short, and its relevant outputs are included on the slide. Palladium was due to begin in June 2019, but was delayed owing to present circumstances, and we realised we were going to need to be more flexible and think more laterally to continue to make progress.
So during our EPAD EASE alignment meetings with Stanford, our Harvard team had been brainstorming ways to rescope our project to better fit our now reduced resources. And we started floating the idea of distilling the preservation functionality from EASE and integrating that function just directly into EPAD instead of maintaining EASE as a separate tool.
Our digital library applications manager also offered some time from a software developer and his team to contribute to Stanford's ongoing work on EPAD. This also ensured that he was going to be familiar with the software when we began Palladium.
And the Stanford team served to introduce and connect these groups that had been working independently up until then. So the primary objective of our now merged project is to integrate long-term email preservation functionality into Stanford University's EPAD software, which already supports other activities around the appraisal, processing, discovery, and delivery of email. Our intention is that the enhanced product will provide the digital archiving community with a tool that supports the email archiving workflow more robustly. Because our preservation infrastructures and workflows vary so greatly across our three institutions, the enhanced EPAD will support functions for local customization and extensibility, making the preservation function of EPAD broadly applicable for diverse institutional needs.
And this is our project team. And it includes digital preservation and application specialists, special collections directors, archivists, and software developers and consultants, all of whom provide essential support and input.
So as far as next steps go, luckily, Jess's team just got the go-ahead from their institution to hire for their Palladium project in January. So that's definitely moving forward. Yay. And as far as our joint project focused on integrating preservation functionality into EPAD goes, we've applied for a grant to support this work, the budget of which we worked really hard to pare it down intensely, focusing almost entirely on just the development. So we'll be finding out within the next couple of months whether we'll be awarded that grant, and if so, we'll begin the project in earnest in January 2021 with some planning work happening in the meantime. Regardless, we hope that by being forced to trim out all the fat we feel we could possibly trim from our work plan, we will be in a place to find a path forward. I'd say one of the few silver linings of this global pandemic is that the limitations and redirections that we're all facing have compelled us to be more efficient with our resources and seek connections we hadn't previously considered. So taking advantage of collaborative development projects like this one will actually advance our work more quickly and beyond our previous distinct expectations.
Thank you very much, iPros, for including us in this great event. Our contact info is up on the slide. Please feel free to get in touch, and we look forward to your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. An excellent triple act. So, Beth, do we have any questions in the chat?
No, we don't actually have any questions. I think people were just impressed at the collaboration and taking it all in. We do have a comment from William Kilbride that EPAD at Stanford, as well as email preservation at John Rylands, won digital preservation awards in 2018 and 2014, respectively. Excellent. Just to put a little polish on that.
Well, I'm going to abuse my position as chairperson, and I'm going to ask a question. You mentioned silver linings. Is there perhaps a further silver lining that you might be able to achieve more as a result of working collaboratively than you would have done individually?
Yeah, I think we're absolutely getting, the scope of our project has expanded significantly, and what we thought originally coming into our EPAD-EASE roadmap alignment would be something that we'd address years ahead. We were kind of forced to just move it up, and by Manchester joining the partnership, we've really expanded just the broadness of the use cases. I think it'll be a better project overall.
William's got a question in the chat. Do you think the collaboration will outlast the pandemic? Any of you?
I certainly hope so. We've got lots of different plans for various different EPAD working groups, and Stanford are continuously developing EPAD, of course, so we hope to continue to be involved. Yeah, we're very excited about it.
There's a technical question from Garrett. Are you happy with EPAD's ability to retain context with other records generated through the same activity? If it's too long to answer, please, I always take it offline, but if you can do it quickly.
I don't know if he's thinking about attachments or other types of records generated through sending emails, but EPAD does maintain the context of messages and their attachments. Absolutely.
Okay, well, perhaps Gary, if you could expand that question, at the end we can go into it. But thank you very much. Can I have a round of applause, please, from everyone virtually and on screen? Excellent presentation, and we'll move on to our next one, which is Karen Hansen and Teep. I'm sorry, Teep. I'm getting mangled. Teep. Oh God, sorry. You introduce yourself. It's going to be so much easier. Preserving new forms of digital scholarship at scale. Go for it.
Sure. So hopefully you can see that. So I just want to thank the organizers and jump right in. I'm Karen Hansen. I'm the Senior Research Developer at Portico, and I'm co-presenting with my colleague from LOCKSS, Tim, who will be speaking shortly. So the project we've been working on is called Enhancing Services to Preserve New Forms of Scholarship. It has two goals. The first goal is to evaluate a variety of enhanced ebooks and identify what can be preserved at scale using tools currently available. And then the second goal is, based on these results, to develop guidelines that publishers and authors can use to improve preservability of works. And it's funded by the Mellon Foundation and led by NYU Libraries. So hopefully you can see this video. I put it together to show some examples. This is a book with annotations and highlights. It also has downloadable executables. This is an EPUB with a embedded YouTube video that works in a browser. And this last one has a 3D visualization with some underlying data that interacts with the texts. So where preservation is most often considered, of course, is always at the end after publication. And the goal of this project is to kind of move it nearer to the beginning through these guidelines and even as platforms are being developed. So I'm going to show you some of the examples of the challenges. Hopefully some of these will nod along a little bit. I'm focused on EPUB exports and emulation here, and Tim will talk about web archiving. So this was a common issue with iframe use in EPUBs, where obviously once the link rots, they no longer work. This was an interesting example. I was attempting an emulation approach where I thought maybe I could move the code from the server to a virtual machine and run it in emulation and have the whole application, but I found it just wasn't loading. And when I looked, there was this initialization of the application that was dependent on a font loading, and the font was a Google API. So it's kind of time bomb of maintenance. There were also these third-party hosted dynamic features. This one was an ArcGIS feature where a lot of the configuration had been done on that service. The left is what it's supposed to look like. The middle is if we point a web crawler at it, and on the right is emulation once it's just offline. Another common problem was where there was a lot of data software visualizations that had supplemental material, but it was embedded visually somehow. The gray circle represents what kind of things we would need in the package if we were to recreate that. And the purple one on the right is what was often supplied. So something that needed to be a little bit cleaned up. Some things might be missing, like documentation and so on. Examples of solutions we're putting forward to these things. So this uses EPUB as an example to make the point But on the left, you'll see keeping resources local to the work. So in this case, moving the file inside the EPUB. It could apply to web fonts too, moving the file inside. And if it can't be moved inside, then to actually supply a citation and don't just leave it as a sort of gray square, so that if there's a persistent identifier, maybe if we have both objects, we can reconnect them somehow. Also encouraging going through what if contingency plans. If your ArcGIS service is no longer available, do you have all of the data and some representation of what it looked like when it was embedded in the text to go back to? And also the idea of a fallback, where if this visualization disappears, maybe there's something reasonable there that replaces it, so it's not just a sort of hole in the text and the flow is continued. And just a final point I want to make before I hand it over is that a lot of the time I found that the preservation goals we had aligned with other publisher goals. So this was helpful. For example, accessibility, it's helpful to have a static alternative UI and descriptive metadata on everything. And then maintainability, not depending on outside services, so you don't have to keep fixing things. Portability, having cleaner packaging and having an easier handoff between platforms is really helpful. And hopefully we'll now have an easy handoff to Tib, who's going to present the second half.
Thank you, Karen. I'm also going to share my screen so that I can page through my slides. There we go. So I'll continue with more examples of challenges we encountered with some of the works in that are part of this grant. The IIIF specification is a framework to interact with images as abstract entities through an API. You can request format conversion and cropping and rotation. So now images aren't really files anymore. They are the result of arbitrary API queries. Here's an example of a work from the University of Michigan Press Fulcrum platform. It has this high resolution image that can be interacted with like a Google map. You can zoom and rotate and whatever. So it's really made of these tiles. And so it's a matter of discovering all these tiles, collecting and preserving them. And this is what it looks like in replay, all, very similar, and you can now interact with the little Google Maps-like widget. Well, let's try this other work also from University of Michigan Press. And what happens in replay if we press the plus button to zoom in? Gray. But if we press a second time, zoomed in image. And this is because it turns out that the tiling is arbitrary, and if we only discover the smallest tiles, we actually we have a discontinuity of user experience in replay. So examples of solutions for this, you can reverse engineer the image display widget's behavior, collect the corresponding tiles, intercede at replay to request preserved image tiles. And the downside of that is that there might be discontinuous user experience, and it's tied to specific behaviors of a front-end widget. An emulation approach is actually implementing a IIIF image service preservation side. And now you intercede at replay and provide arbitrary responses on the objects themselves, but now there's a non-trivial implementation, maintenance, and also image conversion and manipulation computational load at replay time, which is sort of outside the preservation mission. Other examples of challenges we encountered, GIS mapping, it's conceptually the same, but exponentially worse. So here is a work from Stanford University Press, which is essentially very, very map-centric. You can see in the top right corner, you can select different kinds of base layers. Here's one, here's another one, here's a third one. And then you can select different overlays of interesting data points to draw on top. So here is some overlay that you can add. So how many tiles are there in this view area that we were looking at, which was roughly sort of over China? I'll spare you the calculations, but exponentially many, 55 million or so, 56 million for the map tiles, 44 million for the Stanford overlay tiles. But this is really worse because there's really 8, 9, 10 choices for maps and 22 choices for overlays from the Stanford GeoWeb Services server. So order of magnitude 1.5 billion tile objects if we wanted to represent just this particular area. But it turns out that this particular work contains several outliers. I made a little thumbnail on the right-hand side. There's some points in North America and some data points in Europe. So really restricting to this area of the world is not sufficient. So possible solutions. Here, the limited subset approach is probably not a good lead. There will be a loss of value to future scholars if we limit the zoom factor. But even if we do, it's still exponentially large. And also, it's actually complex logic. It's not just, X, Y coordinates of rectangular areas. There is actually, trigonometry and rotation, and the Earth is much more complicated than these flat images. So an emulation approach might be a good lead. We could limit ourselves to a single map type, but that might still result in unacceptable loss of value to future scholars. So for example, if we decide that the only map type we support at replay time is OpenStreetMap, it will be very sort of map and street centric. Well, what if the work was really about topography or the environment? And it would require significant expertise for implementing even one kind of map API. But worse than that, there is no standard mapping API, right? So how would we intercede if it uses, let's say, ArcGIS, but the only one that we have at replay time is OpenStreetMap? They don't have compatible APIs or coordinate systems. So GIS mapping is big, but the problem is that GIS data is bigger. So scalability is just probably outside of the reach of current preservation services, because we could say that mapping tools are common among all works. And so we could have one solution that fits all for mapping stuff, but each work has its own interesting overlays and data points in GIS data, and that doesn't scale over many works. That's unique to each work. Okay, that's it for my slides. Thank you.
Thank you both. Excellent and enormous numbers. Scary. So do we, Beth, do we have any questions in the chat?
Not that I can see at the moment. We've been very quiet so far. I think people are still thinking about processing their questions.
Yeah, mind-boggling numbers. You've outlined some problems, some very interesting problems, and some potential solutions. And in your blurb, you mentioned that you were going to generate some guidelines to hopefully nip these things in the bud before it gets to the point of publication. How are you going to communicate those guidelines? And as a supplemental question, is there any way of automatically grading or verifying or certifying the material as it comes into you to say this is matching the guidelines you propose?
So NYU Libraries are orchestrating that. They're putting together the guidelines over the coming months, and those should be out publicly hopefully sometime early next year. As for the second part, we don't have a method for that yet, but I think that's of interest as a next step to sort of evaluate a publisher's process against this and see if it's helpful.
It strikes me that many researchers that I've come across like doing their own thing, and very rarely, unless pushed, will they follow guidelines such as this, unless it's imposed on them. Anyway, that's just me wittering on. So I think that's all the questions, unless you've got some more there, Beth? No?
Nothing else has popped up, but
Okay.
I kind of, oh, sorry, I'll let you continue.
Okay, no worries. Thank you both. That was a very interesting, excellent presentation. So could you please show our appreciation in the normal fashion? Use the virtual ones as well. Okay, so next we have Janine Kramer-Smith from the World Bank Group. Digital preservation hard questions. The struggle is real. Go for it.
Hello. Let me share my slide deck if I can figure out which the right one is to do for that. All right, and let's see what happens when I actually play it. Okay, can you guys see the slides, or are you seeing my, okay, perfect. Well, thank you for including me in the session. I'm going to try and focus on mine. I have a lot of ideas now about the session right before mine. Thank you. I have questions more later. So my proposal was to talk about the things we're struggling with. So this session is very much in the weeds. This is us and what we are trying to figure out. How do we rationalize data models? How do we make sure we can surface our digital assets? What metadata do we need for the various functions, arrangement, description, and then what new technology can we leverage and what can we use it to do? So first we're going to talk about standards. This is one of my favorite XKCDs, right? So you have 14 competing standards. The solution is a 15th. What that means for us, Data models, so many data models from all different places. We're using Preservica as our preservation platform. So there's the metadata Preservica gives you by default. There's metadata added by their SIP creator. There's metadata fragments you can add, either standard-based ones, mods, Dublin Core EAD, or custom ones with whatever you like, different levels of metadata. And then we have all these other systems that we're integrating. So our HP records management system is our Union catalog. It knows about all of our analog content. We want it to know about everything, including the digital. We have an access to memory platform. That's where we're publishing our archival description. That's in ISAG, which is created in HPRM. And then we have all these different source legacy systems. How do we pull the metadata in? What metadata is important for us to surface versus just preserve? So I'm not going to read you code, but giving you just one glimpse of one bit stream for one asset in Preservica. There's lots of layers, and they all make sense, right? We have an information object at the top, and then a preservation object, and it has various pieces going all the way down to the bit stream. And when we first started working with this, it takes a little while to wrap your head around all these different levels and what they mean and how they're used by the tool, by the folks who developed Preservica and the expectations there. So when we first worked on mapping, on the left you see the little snippet from Preservica. On the right is where we're creating this metadata entry in our repository in that HPRM Union catalog. And so we thought, oh, what are some great attributes we can pull? We can pull file length, we can pull MIME type, and we pulled them from all these different levels. And it took a while to realize that that's maybe not scalable. Many things won't have those attributes. Things may have multiple bit streams for a single asset. So we're simplifying, and this is what we're moving forward to implement. The green there are things we're sure of. The orangey yellow are things we're talking about and thinking about. The first three are things you just get by default out of the box from Preservica. You've got a reference ID number, you have a title, you have a description. And one of the questions from our team for description was, is that the description of the object or notes about the object or about the way you got the object? So that's an open question for us. And then for things when we eventually publish it, we know we're going to want to have this access to a public version. These other pieces we're hoping to sort of elevate up from lower levels in some rational way so we can have a broad idea. I don't need to know if it's a JPEG, but it's really useful to know it's an image or a moving image or a data set. Moving on to surfacing digital content. So this is a little snapshot from our Archives Holdings website. It's at archivesholdings.worldbank.org, and it's built on the Access to Memory platform. And you see here, everything's beautifully in context with fonts, sous-fonts, series. There's description if I could scroll down. And then that big blue arrow is pointing at our inventory list. Right now, the inventory lists are all about the paper structure of the world, of folders. And this is how we're providing some access to digitized content. In this case, the daily schedule for President McNamara. The first one is April 68 to July of 68. It's been fully disclosed, and if you could click on that view button, you would get a PDF. Well, what does that look like for digital content? In some cases, it's really easy to imagine a parallel, whether it's a zip file of all the content related to a single project or a single effort. In other cases, there's going to be so much stuff, so many different bit streams and different formats and different ways people are going to want to access them. And this presentation is lots of questions and not a lot of answers. My hope is to share the things that we're exploring, and as we research, and our whole archives team is working on investigating things other organizations are doing, whether they are international orgs with archives or academic institutions or national archives. What are they doing to do this surfacing of content, especially in some sort of automated way? And we're open. If you guys are doing stuff, tell us because we're trying to learn. And we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We know, I'm going to go back one slide. We know that the description is going to be fairly similar in terms of having an aggregate description. And then at some point you want to go look at the stuff. So what does digital look in place of this? Next, machine learning and AI. So one more XKCD cartoon for you. It sounds so amazingly promising, and I'm very hopeful. I'm the one who's always thinking of new and different ways we can do this. The list of ideas that we have up in the air and also slightly starting to actually use. So the first one there, identifying records for transfer and appraisal, replacing manual review. Those are really high on our list right now. We have an example in which we are doing appraisal of video conference recordings. So we get a couple hundred of these every month. Right now we're using the title, which sometimes it's a beautiful title that tells you something useful. And sometimes the title is meeting number 7 or monthly meeting, brown bag number 2, not super helpful. So we know that we're doing the best we can. We have a number of years worth of these manual appraisals we've done. We're looking into using machine learning to train on those sets. So here's a set of things we knew we wanted. Here's a set of things we chose not to keep. Can we automate that process instead of having someone sit there and read through? Identify empty files. This one's a classic. We have people who will create a meeting. They will schedule for their meeting to be recorded. And then the meeting is canceled, but the recording is not. Sounds super interesting when you read its title, but if you actually were to open the darn thing, it would be an empty room, or in this case, nowadays, it would be an empty Zoom with nothing happening. So how do we identify those? How do we not spend our time and energy and money and resources on preserving empty video files or video files that have ones and zeros, but when you look at what's there, there's no one talking, there's no one presenting. In terms of access, we're looking at things related to auto transcription of AV, and that would support, for example, helping us find those empty files, topic mining and keywords for all sorts of things. So we're digging in at all these different levels, and sometimes it feels like we're alone trying to find all these answers, but we know we're not. And I'm open to questions. I'm on Twitter at Spellbound Blog. I welcome ideas from others of how people are answering any of these questions and finding their own way through these struggles.
Thank you very much, Janine. That was boggling again. And SKCD, bingo. Sorry. Right, so Beth, do we have any questions in the chat?
I'm sorry to report there don't appear to be any questions.
Oh, you're a boring buggers, aren't you? Okay, I have a question. A couple of questions, actually. You mentioned Preservica into Atom there. Are you doing that manually or automatically or what?
First step, we're not doing it yet, but that transition from pushing, the first step is getting metadata from Preservica into our intermediate system, which is that HPRM, that records, the union catalog that I mentioned. Mm-hmm. Right now, we are in an automated fashion propagating the descriptions that are stored in HPRM, the lists of folders, and in the cases of digitized content, the links to the published digitized content. So all of that is working. It is an automated process that we worked on with the Artifactual folks. My hope is that we reuse that same structure for the digital. The Born Digital, we are, when we pull content across into HPRM, that metadata is the same metadata we hope to publish eventually in context of description. The arrangement and description of that digital content related to the ISAG descriptions will happen in HPRM in a hybrid manner alongside the analog materials.
I look forward to seeing it in action.
Me too.
I do have. I'll have to talk to Justin about that one. I do have another question though. Which was your hardest question you came across? Your hardest problem? Because you've mentioned several. Which is the one that's causing you to lose sleep?
I think I won't say I'll lose sleep from any of them, but I will say the ones that keep my mind spinning, that's a form of losing sleep. I think the metadata one, honestly, there are so many different types of metadata, different levels of metadata, and I sometimes feel like I find the answer for one thing. Here's the metadata we need for arrangement and description. Maybe we don't need this level, but then I realize what that other level's needed and I need to rationalize. It's that making everything work together and making it such that all the archivists in our team understand what impacts other things, right? So if we have someone doing ingest and doing data entry, or we're writing code to automatically pull and populate metadata, how is that going to affect what's published on the archives holding site, right? That whole system from one end to the other, that keeps me thinking.
Yeah, I know what you feel. Rather than going into detail here, but in data models and metadata and so on, see me after school, as they say.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we please show our appreciation? Thank you, everyone. Okay, so next we have, according to my list, Laurie Donovan from the Internet Archive, Beyond the Commercial Cloud. Go for it, Lauren.
Great, thank you. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Alrighty. Let's see, can you all see
Yes.
this now? Okay, great. Now it's loading for me. Okay, wonderful. All right, thanks everyone. So I'm Laurie Donovan, and I'm the Senior Program Manager for Web Archiving and Data Services at the Internet Archive, and I'll be talking about our process of building additive and sustainable nonprofit digital preservation services here. So first, high-level Internet Archive, who are we? We're a nonprofit 501c3 digital library. We have a global network of partners. We have a lot of different data types that we store and provide access to that many of you may be familiar with, but just to run down the list, the Wayback Machine is the largest publicly available web archive in existence. Folks, the general public, can upload content to our archive.org website, including video, audio, software, images, texts. If you saw Jefferson's talk, he gave numbers for all those things. We have some services that we provide too, including book scanning in partnership with libraries around the world. We have an Archive-It web archiving service that has over 700 users. And we do custom web archiving and data analytics services as well. And sort of how we do storage and preservation at the Internet Archive. We have self-owned and self-operated data centers in many different locations that provide both geographic and geopolitical redundancy. There's no monetization of ingest or egress. There's free storage and access for general Internet Archive users. So that's, content that's uploaded to archive.org specifically. And the scale at which we work and the efficiencies that we've built into our data center operations allow us to provide low cost or at cost services, much less cost than commercial cloud. And we build on both our engineering and technical expertise, as well as our community building capacity, our membership in the broader kind of digital library and archives community, to really get a good sense of preservation needs and goals, and to sort of narrow in on opportunities for collaborations around service provision. And so we're working with some partners. We're working on a digital preservation service pilot, and we provide storage and preservation for partners' data already, and it includes multiple copies, locations, fixity checks, etc. We sometimes get requests for additional customization and features, and we do this in a lot of cases in a kind of one-off way. But in order to be more sustainable across the board, we want to provide these as a standard service. And for many of our partners and for many of the people who upload content to archive.org, the existing guarantees that we have work just great, meet their storage and preservation needs. But we want to make sure that key use cases are addressed and that partner needs are met in a sustainable way, both for us and for them. So I'm just going to dive into a couple quick case studies about what this sort of looks like. So the first is about web archive data, so WARC files, and this is based on content that we already have. In this example, an international organization is collecting institutional and thematic web content using our Archive It service. They're currently building local preservation capacity and policies for digital collections and haven't decided whether or not WARCs will be included in their institutional repository. For the record, this is a common use case that we hear from our partners. And just to give some kind of outline what our standard storage and preservation policies are for Archive It, it includes perpetual storage and access, multiple copies, basic fixity, tools and APIs, etc. And then, as I mentioned previously, we sometimes do additional preservation features based on partner need or contractual requirements. So this use case got us thinking about how do we provide additive services for content that we already store. Another case study is around data that would require ingest that we aren't currently storing, that we didn't capture. And so in this example, a college is undergoing a large-scale digitization project for photos and manuscripts, but doesn't have adequate long-term storage locally. They've explored commercial cloud solutions, but found that the cost for ingest or for access to the files is prohibitive for them. Doesn't meet their needs. So this is where the sort of robust tools that we have for ingest come into play, not having monetization of ingest and egress, the ability to include derivative files, metadata files, access and preservation copies, different file types in a single intellectual entity, and the option for additive preservation features. So talking a little bit more about what we hear most from folks who are interested in these digital preservation services, what those additive features are kind of on top of what we already provide. So this includes things like user-defined fixity check frequency, the ability to specify the frequency, but also kind of see really detailed information about how those fixity checks. Additional replication, so more copies. Additional geolocation, being able to say where those copies ought to be stored. So you might imagine in the international organization example, they might want copies stored in their region as well as other regions. Additional storage architectures to kind of mitigate technology risk, and third-party or external repository replication, so the ability to store easily store content elsewhere. And some of the ways that we are looking at sort of meeting these needs and providing data includes having a monitoring and reporting portal, kind of an interactive dashboard that reports on status of data in the system, having API interoperability, both for the reports data as well as for the stored data itself. And again, making this whole process cost effective. And I've talked a bit already about ways that the Internet Archive works to kind of keep our costs low and keep the service options sustainable. But we, because we work with external organizations in so many different ways, that can really allow for cost efficiencies. And this is just kind of an example of what the preservation service dashboard would look like, having, ability to see high-level statistics about where data is stored, reports that have been run, and kind of dig in, click into specific areas and get more detailed and granular information. And we have a lot of related work around preservation, digital preservation services and digital preservation research. So we do a survey that we call State of the Work, which is about what folks are doing for work preservation locally or not doing. We had a grant-funded project called WASAPI that was creating APIs for external, for data export and import. We have integrations with external digital preservation service providers. We have several data set research projects, and the Archives Unleashed integration is a grant that we're kicking off, or we just kicked off, around co-locating storage and preservation with research tools. So we're always happy to talk more about sustainable nonprofit digital preservation. I'll drop this link into the chat afterwards, but we have a survey if you're interested in hearing more about our digital preservation services, that you can fill that out and we'll get in touch.
Thank you very much, Laurie.
Thanks.
And I will certainly be looking for that link at some point. Which reminds me, if presenters are happy to share their slides, please pass them on to Sarah and she'll make sure that they're distributed. So Beth, do we have any questions in the chat?
I think we had one that just popped in from Garrett McMahon. Has the Internet Archive AI undertaken any environmental impact analysis on its storage and preservation services?
That's a great question, and it's one that I'm not entirely sure about. I know that that we've worked with some external partners on providing additional information about environmental impact, and worked with our sort of power and other sort of utility providers to kind of ensure that the way that we are the way that we're implementing our power footprint is sustainable. But I know I could certainly get more information on my end about what exactly that looks like and what our plans are around that. It's a great question.
It's one that did cross my mind as well. I did a presentation about carbon cost segregation yesterday. Okay, I've got a question as well. First of all, a very quick and simple one. Your dashboard, is that open source?
That is something that we developed in-house, and it's currently in prototype form because we're in pilot. Yeah.
Will you be opening it at some point?
That's a great question. I don't know that I don't know that we've discussed it, but it doesn't seem out of the realm.
Good, I'll hold you to that. And I have one of those sticky commercial costing type questions. Perpetual storage, access, all sorts of processes that use compute and hence cost as well. What happens if your subscriber stops paying?
Sure. So that's why for most of the services that we provide, the cost is factored in on the front end. So so that it doesn't depend on ongoing costing. Like, for example, for Archive It, our subscription model is for the data that's captured in a specific year, and it includes perpetual storage for that data. So we factor in the sort of projected ongoing costs into that model.
So it's a pay once, keep forever model.
Yes.
Ooh, interesting. Okay, well, thank you very much, Laurie. I'm pleased for your appreciation, Laurie. That was an excellent talk. Yay. Yeah, all sorts of interesting ways. Okay, so our final talk for this session, Rebecca and Peter Well, when I first looked at it, I thought it was Rebecca, Peter, and George. It's not, it's Rebecca and Peter. We're talking about the AV digitization at scale during quarantine. So please, over to you.
So it is in fact Rebecca, Peter, and George. Thank you. So I'm gonna go ahead and ask George and Peter to introduce themselves while I'm pulling up our slides.
Hi, my name is Peter Higgins. I'm the archives manager at what is now called the GBH Archives. We name changed after we submitted this proposal. We are a public television station, public television and radio station in Boston, Massachusetts. And we're going to talk about AV digitization at scale during quarantine. I almost said the quarantines, sorry. During quarantine. I'll let George introduce himself before I jump in.
Okay, I'm George Blood, and we're the digitization partner for WGBH.
And I'm Rebecca Framau. I'm the digital archives manager at WGBH. And as Peter said, we had just launched into a major digitization project at the time when we all went down into lockdown. So we're just gonna, this is gonna be a pretty conversational presentation. We're just gonna kind of talk through some of the ways in which the challenges that we faced in trying to get ourselves up and running again, and how we've worked around them in order to continue this project under the current conditions. So one of the first challenges, I realize it's a digital conference, but when you're talking about digitizing AV media, there are a lot of physical logistics to handle. So Peter, do you want to talk a little bit about how we've been working with that to get stuff out the door?
Sure. So we each shipment we send 4,800 audio and video tapes over to George, and previously we would have as many as 4 people retrieving tapes from our vault and from our offsite storage simultaneously. Now, due to restrictions within the building, we can only really have a single person in our vault at a time. The actual time it takes to pull all of those tapes has been extended from 4 weeks to 7 to 8 weeks. We're coming close on 8 weeks. We have a shipment going out tomorrow. And there was a lot of back and forth with our human resources department to allow enough person hours to actually do this work. So once we pull everything off the shelves, our vault is on the 2nd floor of our building. Our loading dock is on the 1st floor, obviously, and we need to then move nearly 5,000 items down through the elevator when we're passing carts around with zero or minimal contact, and then masked and gloved the whole time. It just added a whole layer of complication onto a somewhat complex process already.
And of course, all of those items need to be returned after the digitization is complete, which then means that WGBH has those same logistical issues on the return. And so during the 6 months, which has been the real peak of the work, we've ended up warehousing more of the materials here, just as a way to work together based on who has the available resources at each link in the processing. So we have many, I think it's about 30 pallets of material for WGBH in our warehouse. And tomorrow we will return 2 because that was about what they could reasonably handle. And it's just physically one of the biggest things that we're seeing in how we're managing through the pandemic.
Now, we were actually pretty lucky in the way that we planned this, because this is the first project that we've done a couple digitization projects with George before, but this is the first one where we plan to actually have the materials returned digitally rather than physically on drives or LTO tapes, which has turned out to be kind of an unexpected boon given the way that things have played out. George, you want to talk a little bit about the run up to that?
Yeah, we were likewise, the timing on this worked out very well. We moved into a new facility about almost 2 years ago, and as part of that, we installed a ridiculously large internet connection. So as we're digitizing, we do about 120 items a day in audio and video, and we push all of that up over the internet to to WGBH. So it's about 100 hours, including FFV1 encoded video at 40 gigs an hour that we push up to the site every day. And then WGBH is working on their end and managing that data. So we have long had the internal infrastructure for moving that data, but the fact that we had already installed and been using this large internet connection really made working at this time much easier than it would have been even 2 or 3 years ago.
Now that said, there have been challenges in trying for us, who are working in QCing this material to actually handle that at home, because one of the restrictions that we all have working remotely is that our IT department really doesn't want us to strain the connection by downloading, 400 gigabytes a day to our personal machines, not that we even have the storage space to do it. So when we're talking about visual QC and about actually reviewing the materials that we're getting back, that all has to be done through proxies. And so over the past 6 months, a lot of our development work has gone into kind of speeding up our process for automating proxy making over the stuff that comes in from George, so that those proxies can be reviewed by staff at home without putting too much of a strain on their personal machines. But it still requires, I'm actually presenting from the office now. I'm the only one, I think, of the team who is. It still requires me to come into the office once a week or twice a week to actually handle the physical materials, but the high quality master materials, make sure that the MD5s verify and that the formats verify, and that we're actually, doing verification on the masters and not just on the proxies, and things aren't slipping through the cracks in that way. But if we were, still receiving materials on LTO tape, our team working at home wouldn't be able to access them at all. So the fact that we have these digital files already in the cloud and can manipulate them to create proxies has been the only thing that's basically allowed us to continue with this project at all. And the third thing, I know we're running a little bit out of time, but that really allowed us to continue with this project is just the fact that we have worked with George before, and there's a lot of organizational trust between us that's allowed us to kind of work with each other and kind of undertake unusual proceedings when necessary in order to keep this project going.
It's been, that history has really paid off in so many ways. I've been most impressed by the WGBH team that any problem that comes up it's all about how can we solve this rather than whose fault is it and who can be pinned on. It's all about working together in the preservation of the cultural record. So there's, in our meetings every other week, it's, can you help me with this? Oh, no, actually, that would be kind of difficult. But we have these open conversations about, oh, yeah, that's something that we can change and accommodate, like us warehousing the materials and also then extending the QC review period and helping through all that process. So we've really greatly enjoyed working on this project in particular, but especially with the people at WGBH.
And one of the, I think, most interesting, like an example of the ways in which procedures have been undertaken that would never, we'd never do under normal times is, for example, in, I think April, May, June, during the time when it was really difficult for George's team to get in and do any digitization work. There were actually members of George's staff who brought some of our tapes home because they had personal digitization equipment or were able to bring small decks home with them in order to continue digitization work there. And, under normal circumstances, you wouldn't necessarily want your archival tapes kind of being distributed to a variety of individual people's homes. But in order to keep the project going, and because we knew that George's team was going to take, a great deal of care about them, and we could, look back and say, all right, we have duplicates of some of these materials. We can make sure that we can do this safely and still keep the project going so it doesn't just grind to a complete halt. We were able to kind of keep things up that way and continue the digitization work so that our folks at home and our AV catalogers and QCers would still be able to maintain their work and kind of keep the process running and make sure that the project just wouldn't stop.
And the whole risk assessment of what formats that we chose, that these transport well. So you can do DATS, but not quad, for instance. So the most at-risk materials that require the most finicky machines were never on the list. Things that transport gracefully and don't weigh a whole lot were much easier to do, and to just keep everybody occupied and moving the timeline along.
We could talk about this process and the various compromises that we've made and sort of innovative solutions that we've tried to hack our way around to keep the project going for hours, but I know we don't have hours, so we'll stop here. Thank you everyone for listening, and we are happy. Please feel free to reach out to us if you're considering a big digitization project in this particular time. We'd be happy to talk to anyone about what our experience has been.
Thank you very much indeed. Very interesting, excellent. I have a question. I'm going to jump straight in. What was the key lesson or lessons learned that you'd like to pass on to the rest of the community?
Does anyone want to take that, or should I jump in?
Go for it.
I think that number one, flexibility has been the most important thing. Flexibility and the need to kind of figure out flexibility, B, our decision to deliver files digitally and to have as much as possible available in the cloud and accessible to us. So those are kind of the two key factors. It's not just putting it into a distant cloud where you can't access it, you can't manipulate it, you can't do your own transcodes, you have to pull a bunch of material, to pay to get materials down again. But being able to do the work through clouds that we can access, as archivists, I can, if necessary, pull a file down through the command line any day and review it and make sure, kind of deal with individual problems. And having that kind of hands-on access and having developers on staff who are able to kind of figure out solutions to problems like how do we create proxies for 400 files that are receiving every week, and ensuring that our QC team can continue to review them has been vital. And also, like we talked about, being willing to say, all right, what can be done at home? What can be done in ways that aren't standard? What can we do that is going to be an acceptable risk to these materials? It's not an unacceptable risk, but can we take a little bit more risk because we might never have the chance again to actually preserve them, which, as everyone here knows, I think is even more of a question for magnetic media than it is for most other preservation formats.
It's like politics. It's the art of what's possible. And if you focus the discussion on the obstacles, you'll only see obstacles. But if you look at, well, we could do this little thing, you find a lot of little things that allow you to move forward on many fronts.
Did you undertake any formal risk analysis process?
A lot of it was sort of within the context of what we had documentation for within our own archive. And this project, to begin with, has been as much about discovering what we have as it is about kind of reviewing what we have. In many cases, the materials that we're sending are things that we have very little information about. So in many other, if it weren't for this project, these materials would likely die on the shelves. Because without a concrete reason to preserve them, without concrete information that says this is important and we can raise money for it and we can, gain resources to invest in its preservation, it's unlikely that time would ever come. So when you're talking about large quantities of material of sort of unknown value, I do think there comes a time when you have to either leap or decide you're not going to.
The perennial sustainability problem.
Yes.
One last sort of sorry, Peter, do you want to come in there?
Just in defense of our metadata, it is true for a minority of this very large project that we don't know what it is. The vast majority, we have a very good idea, and sometimes we are surprised by what is on the tape, but we should almost always know.
So one last.
There's a lot of control that Peter's working from a very good catalog. Everything's checked out. We check things in. We assess the physical condition upon arrival, so that if something goes wandering, there's a lot of touch points to be sure that the physical items are being cared for as artifacts until the digital surrogates are validated.
Okay, final question from me. This one's for you, Rebecca. You showed a desktop of part of your QC process, and you said you had to use proxies and so on if you want to download enormous files to local machines. I assume remote desktoping was considered at some point. Why did you not go down that path?
Well, we have a relatively limited number of available remote desktops at WGBH. GBH, sorry, and most of them are for the requirements of our production department. So when it comes to the amount of bandwidth available, because our organization is primarily a production organization, that's kind of where those resources have to go. So as much as we can avoid putting strain on that process as possible, we try to. So if we were primarily an archive, I think we would have a lot more resources that would allow us to remote in 2 machines on site. But as it is, we only have a few computers that we can access remotely from home, and most of those would be dedicated to preserving new materials, because in addition to doing this project, we are still receiving daily new projects from Frontline and American Experience and everyone else.
Tell me about it. Beth, are there any more questions in the chat that we should be aware of?
There are a couple of questions that sort of popped up after the fact for some of the other speakers, but I want to note that the time is now 3:15 and the social mixer is beginning. It might be best, unless people want to stick around in this room, I think we have the ability to do that, for people to email their questions to the speakers directly.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone. All the speakers, please show your appreciation for everyone. It's been most enjoyable, and the conversation will run and run. It's now time for the mixer, so please go over there. Sarah, have you got the link?
Already in the box,
in the chat box. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I look forward to seeing all of you at in my time, 4 a.m. in the morning tomorrow morning. I don't know what your time will be, but I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, everybody. See you in a minute.